hit record. Very glad to have you all here today for our webinar on what sub-Saharan African communities are saying about climate change as part of our nature-based solutions project. Today, we're really thrilled to host you to hear some fascinating results about what different communities across sub-Saharan Africa are saying about climate change and some other related topics. We're especially grateful to Yankasa for partnering with us on this event, as well as to Global Affairs Canada for funding our nature-based solutions project. I just wanted to share a few quick housekeeping items. First, just making sure that you select your interpretation language. Thank you very much for sharing that slide. So at the bottom of your screen, there should be a small little globe, and you have an option to choose to listen and respond in either English or French to make sure that you can participate fully. Second, we have some fantastic tech support behind the scenes, monitoring our question and answer section. So please do participate in the webinar in that way by sharing different questions you might have, or even comments in the question and answer section, and we'll make sure to save some time at the end to get to those. Third, a reminder for our speakers to please speak slowly and clearly for interpretation so everyone can participate fully. And a final reminder that this event is being recorded, so afterwards you will have access to the recorded version of this, and you'll also get access to the slides afterwards. Today, we've got a full program for everyone here, and you're going to hear from a number of different speakers from both the FRI team as well as those who have participated in these on-air dialogues. I'm going to start with our colleague Charles to talk about what on-air dialogues are and a bit of the context behind the Nature-Based Solutions project. Shortly after that, you'll hear from our colleague Samuel talking about the results themselves, along with some of the limitations and the insights there. And then finally, you'll hear from our colleague Sarem talking about why these results matter and what kinds of policy implications they could have, along with a special guest, Ms. Ange Patricia Adiko from Cote d'Ivoire, to share sort of a bit of the government perspective on things too. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Charles to start us off. So Charles, over to you.
Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you all the participants for joining. Next slide, please. Next slide. So as Christian said, the feedback from communities that we are going to share with you today is actually part of our nature-based solution project. It's titled On Air for Gender Inclusive Nature-Based Solution. And this project seeks to address two of the most defining environmental crises of our time, of course, which is that of climate change and biodiversity loss. And we are focused in rural sub-Saharan Africa, and we are using high-impact radio programs to be able to address these issues. And when we talk of high-impact radio programs, there are actually three programs approaches that are all integrated to address this question. And we work with 25 stations in 6 countries. That is Burkina Faso, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, in Ethiopia, in Uganda, and in Zambia. And the whole idea is that we want to, learn more from local communities about their priorities, about their ideas, about their experiences with climate change, with 3 elements in mind, to enhance their action on climate change adaptation, and also about biodiversity using nature-based solutions. And once we deliver these programs, we'll be able to pick out the best ideas that emerge from these programs and spread it Africa-wide through scripts and stories, through the network that we have of 3,500 broadcasters in 38 countries. And it's worth noting here that we will not only share resources, radio resources, but we would work effectively with about 200 stations within these 38 countries. Yeah, sorry for that noise. So I was saying that we will not only share these resources, but we would work with about 200 stations in some of these 38 countries to really produce radio programming that are based on nature-based solutions that are emerging as the best ideas from the 25 stations and the 6 countries that we do high-impact radio programs with. Next slide, please. So one other key aspect of this work that we are doing is that we really want to create an environment where women and youth, and of course men as well, have increased role to contribute to conversations about climate change. And that decision makers and policy makers are paying attention to the voices of these marginalized groups, unheard groups, and are taking that into consideration as far as policy is concerned, as far as programs are concerned, planning elements are concerned, as well as investment in the area of environment and in the area of climate change. Next slide. So we did mention that there are 3 key programs that are integrated in what we call the high impact radio program. And we said on-air dialogue, which is a subject of this discussion today, because this is what we used to collect information from the communities that we are going to share with you today. So what is really this on-air dialogue? So the whole idea about on-air dialogue came from the fact that we need to try to fill this important information gap, which is that of getting the perspectives, the experiences, the knowledge, the wisdom, the needs, the challenges of communities on different topics. For example, we are talking about climate change, so as to inform what we do as development stakeholders, be they government, institutions, NGOs, civil society organizations, private businesses that work with communities. So this is one of the approaches that FRI has crafted to be able to engage, consult with communities to get their own perspectives. Next slide, please. So on-air dialogues are actually an interactive radio program approach. As I said, that we used to consult communities on specific topics. And it's actually integrated radio, and what we call our ULISA. It's actually an interactive voice response system that when integrated within a radio program framework, we're able to get communities respond to polls in their local language using their mobile phones, and that doesn't cost them doing so. Next slide, please. So it's an annual, the way it's planned in the project is that it's an annual exercise that we do, these consultations that we do on various topics. And we will be sharing this on an annual basis. We will be sharing what we've done this time, and every year we'll be doing so, really to share with you, and also what these results, how we are using these results, and what outcomes we are getting from using the results and engaging on different aspects of the work. And you will be hearing more of this today. Next slide, please. So before we actually go into the discussion proper, or hearing properly what came out from the communities, it will be good to just have a glimpse of a caller from Dano community in Burkina Faso who called on this on-air dialogue program and shared her own perspective. So Christian, can you go to the video so that we can hear the caller from Burkina Faso?
Ayo tika kambole mobo yarna kami yemi devriye mi ire tie bomo na me kwor ka toni change ha minte poso as yele sofo yemene te kwanche ka te me ye ka do kon on bon ko ye action e adarkie pal po pataba na me ko kira da mo ko na kai ka bon pier mi piera te ta yanga mo po don ka babla te kizi mi piera ta yanga mo po ati mi gati mi konko ya kay mi sonte ati puri na ti mi ta da puri bibi ati mi bibi yon ala na kati mi te kadu ko mena so ya me imena sikin moni on ade ta me ire na ko ha me nya ha me ka ya so to wa ya so ba la ba me na wi na tiere don ko ha me boko me ya so to ba la hu we na ine don ga to wa ke ba me na ko ga ti mi ala kati mi ka mi kontre ka ba mi sonte non ba mena I ba men bon ba mena ton voir me voir me era tembisi ko me era mo bebe na I wo bebe mena ton yeso ba ye ba mena ton me wala na bo na bebe ababa me ona vu amu wa me ona mo ko ka dira da dire ngba ye son la ko ba don halna an men no matimi se ka tinte ka yeso ko me ma no mana nzie kan so fa se me te bora yer ko re ha ti ba kwa so la mena wena me ton me yer na kuran ta ba ye me mi ka mba ziele me ho ye ame na ko ma ziela ho nzie so ko ba kiera da dara ko me nya ti me amba sora ka bon I ka po me ngi kiera da amon po kati mba kati ko fam ke kari a ba me kiera mba no matimi si timiti ton e kari eso ame me wa na ye don ala ka temi mba bon suna mo po e ban kiera da ya ba ziele on to ma ke ti ko bebe ko shoko ke ti ba kiera don mam bo ka me ka ti o me si ati ti azilie ziele ka ma me po ame ton so ati me po na ti me bi bala me ne bi ata ko na
Thank you for watching. I'm going to hand it back to Christian. Christian, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Thank you for taking us through that first section of a bit more about the project, but also about what on-air dialogues are. Now, for the bulk of this presentation, I'd like to turn it over to our colleague Samuel to talk about some of the results from the on-air dialogue and also some of the limitations that might be there in terms of the project itself. So Samuel, over to you.
Thank you, Christian, for that. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this. We have some exciting results that we are going to share with you. Results from various communities, as was shared by the caller that we just saw in the video. For connectivity reasons, I will turn off my video and then I'll go straight into the slides. Thank you very much. Great. So as Charles mentioned, Charles, thank you very much for that introduction. We operate using the Lisa system for callers. So usually what the Lisa system does is it presents a caller with a series of questions, multiple questions from which the caller will choose the one that merely describe the situation that he or she finds himself or herself. Then the user presents the caller with an open-ended question. So it means the tool has a way of giving us quantitative as well as qualitative information. Responses are then mostly multiple choices, and then it can be disaggregated in various ways: gender, geographic, what do you call it, ecosystems or ecological zones. And then basically we can also use some statistical tools to analyze the result that we have. Next slide, please. For this presentation, as just mentioned, we are going to do this every year. So for this year, the on-air dialogue focus on 4 major areas, aspects. One is changes in biodiversity are being observed in the communities and the actions that are being taken by the communities to protect their or restore their this biodiversity. We also wanted to know the impact of climate change and how their communities are adapting to these changes. And then the third one is how communities make decisions on climate change and adaptation actions, and how they organize themselves to act on these changes. Then the last session that this dialogue focused on was about suggestions, also some few challenges and suggesting some report that communities need. Next slide, please. Yes, so as we heard from the caller, that the video we just saw, she is just one, but here we are pulling results from about 20,000 people of such callers that we just saw. So the voice that we are going to hear from now on, it's quite massive, from about 20,000 people. And as we can see here, basically we have segregated this by gender. And probably you will expect that mostly participation of women is generally lower in many countries, with the exception of Cote d'Ivoire. Next slide, please. In terms of age, again, we have more participation from the younger people, those who are below 35 years. I think we also expect that because they are sometimes mostly conversant with the use of phones and manipulation of the phones. Next slide, please. So then next thing is go into the result, the various sessions, the 4 areas that I said that we focus on for this year. So the first one is looking at the changes in biodiversity being observed in the community. Next slide, please. And I would like to start, probably this will be the only quotation I will read during this presentation, but I would like to read this quotation because for me it captures a lot. It's coming from a man from Burkina Faso. He is saying there is a sacred forest in our community, but it is now at the mercy of indiscriminate logging. The customary people who used to protect this forest no longer have any power today. The government can help us to protect this forest, which is a community forest that is disappearing. Why I captured this, for me, this is quite important, is that in many African countries, we have forests that harbor maybe what we call the sacred places. But if the sacred places, as we see here, are being eroded, people do not fear these sacred places, and the trees are being felled, the forests are disappearing in these sacred places, then the question is, or the guess is as clear as you can imagine, that what will become of other areas if the sacred places are disappearing. Next slide, please. So here we ask a question about the changes that are being observed, biodiversity changes that are being observed. And here we are looking at less variety of animals and plants, new types of animals and plants, and maybe less food and medicine available in the community. As you can see from the slide here, over 70% participants from Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Uganda, Burkina Faso, and Zambia say there have been either a big or some changes in biodiversity. And I think we can all attest to this. Next slide, please. With the exception of Cote d'Ivoire, where we find some differences between the young and old, the trend is similar for the rest of the countries. In Cote d'Ivoire, the young seem to say some changes, but the old people are saying just some few changes. And this you will expect in every community where you have different views according to age. Next slide, please. Still on our observed changes, if we take Uganda and Cote d'Ivoire as an example, going into the ecological zones of these two countries, we find that savanna grassland in Uganda has the highest proportion of participants reporting some or big changes in biodiversity. In Cote d'Ivoire, the sub-Equatoria is the ecological area where people are observing very big changes. So when we go down by ecological zones, you can see some clear differences as well. Next slide, please. In the same way, when you look at it from gender, for both men and women participants in all 6 countries, except Ghana, The destruction of habitat is deemed to be the most important cause of changes in biodiversity. Others that they talk about include changes in weather and pollution. Next slide, please. So if we maybe dig a little deeper in terms of ecological zone, looking at Ghana and Burkina Faso. In Ghana, changes in weather come out strongly in the transitional and coastal zones, while pollution and destruction of habitat are mentioned as the most important causes in the two savanna zones in Burkina, also in Ghana, sorry. Destruction of habitat and arrival of invasive species are well mentioned in Burkina Faso. And I think the quote I read from the beginning also gives some credence to this. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is another quotation. I think I will take this just to let you know that human activities, tree cutting, and unsustainable practices like fishing, overfishing, are contributing to these biodiversity changes that we are seeing. Next slide, please. Good. Again, both the young and old participants in all 6 countries agree that the protection and restoration of forests, wetlands, and coastal areas is the best way to protect or increase biodiversity. So that is in terms of our suggestions that people are offering. Next slide, please. Good. So with all these observations that are happening in the communities in terms of changes in biodiversity, including changes in weather, let's see what is the impact on the communities. Next slide, please. We have varying degrees of impact of changes in biodiversity, as we have mentioned earlier. About 80%, 82% of participants from Cote d'Ivoire and 58% from Zambia, also a good number from Ethiopia, either say some impact or very big impact in biodiversity. Next slide, please. Again, another quotation here, which basically is talking about things that they used to get freely from nature. Now, those things are no more there. Things like medicine or food, fruits that you just go behind the maybe the forest adjacent to the community and then you plug. These things are no more there. You have to use money to buy them. Next slide, please. In terms of these changes, when it comes to hotter weather and drier climate has also had some impact on the communities, especially those in Cote d'Ivoire, where over 80% of the poll participants said it has had very big impact, and we can see that in the slide. Next slide, please. Over 70% of the poll participants from all the 6 countries think that changes in rainy season have either had some or very big impact on their communities. This view is similarly shared across gender and age groups. That is not shown here, but that is what we find. Next slide, please. Again, another quotation looking at a man from Zambia talking about changes in the climate and how pests, all these things are affecting yield as well as affecting the fertility of the land. Next, please. We have a very big impact on amount of food available and available in Cote d'Ivoire and also in Zambia. And you can see in Cote d'Ivoire, for example, about 83% of the participants are saying yes, this has had a very big impact on food available on the table or in the forest due to climate change. Next slide, please. In terms of looking at some country-specific ecological differences, in Uganda, most of the reports of impact of most people report of impact of food available is from the savanna grassland zone, while in Zambia it is coming from the cropland area. So when you go into the various ecological zones, obviously you also see some differences there. Next, please. Sorry, this graph is a little bit, but I think it's clear. It's clear enough. Here we are looking at how both men and women participate in all 6 countries agree that women have been more greatly affected by the negative effects of climate change than men. And that is well agreed across other countries. In fact, in Ghana, the proportion of men who agree, about 64%, agree to this, higher than, or it is higher than the proportion of women. So actually, the men themselves are thinking that the effect is much, much more, even more than what the women themselves recognize. Next slide, please. One of the most significant changes made to respond to challenges of climate change is the use of crops and livestock that are adaptable to the new climates. Protection and restoration of natural areas also play an important role in these responses, especially in Uganda. It is, however, interesting to note that on average, about a third of the participants hold that no change has been made to respond to climate change challenges. When we did a little bit of further analysis, we found out that this view came from the youth, especially. So this is an indication that probably we still have to do more for all of us to see that we are making some progress in terms of responding to these changes. Next slide, please. So if we have made some responses, as we just saw in the preceding slide, then the question is, who is behind or who are responsible for these decisions that went into those actions or those initiatives that were taking place to respond to the challenges. So this episode will look at decision making processes and how the communities organize themselves to respond to some of these changes. Next slide, please. So we see that from this graph that the government and community or local leaders have been mentioned by over 2/3 of the participants as the main initiators of community actions. NGOs, especially international NGOs, are also mentioned, especially in Cote d'Ivoire and in Ghana. Next, please. Yeah, so this quotation actually also speaks to that normally they initiate some of these responses to climate change and adaptation actions with religious leaders and some community leaders in the various communities that we are doing the project. Next, please. Men and women from all the 6 countries agree that the rights and interests of all community members were considered in the decision-making process. That is quite an interesting. About a third of the women in Cote d'Ivoire, however, hold that this was not the case. And that also calls for more investigation. Next, please. About 70% of participants from all 6 countries were of the view that the communities had support from the government and local leaders in the decision-making process. I think this also affirms the quotation that we saw earlier. Next, please. In terms of inclusiveness of our decision process, Majority of men and women participants from all the 6 countries, probably except Cote d'Ivoire, agreed that the voices of women were adequately considered during the decision-making processes. In Cote d'Ivoire, only about a third of the men agreed, but the majority of the women, 70%, also think that yes, these people were all considered in the decision-making process. The next slide, please. Also, in terms of interest of our interests and voices of youth, majority of both old and young participants of the poll in the countries agree that the voices of youth were adequately taken into account. Over a third of the participants in Ethiopia, however, disagree. Next, please. So we go to the ecological zones of Ethiopia and Ghana to see what is happening. Most, about 52% of the older participants of the poll from forest woodland or woodland zone do not think the voices of and interests of youth were adequately considered. So I think that is where the Ethiopian issue is coming from. A good proportion, 58% of the younger participants from wetland rather think this was adequately done. In Ghana, high proportion of young people than old from all the zones agree that the interests and voices of minority communities were taken into account. So this has tells us some level of inclusiveness in the decision-making process. Next, please. Good. Then the last part of the episode was to consider a few challenges that our communities are facing in organizing themselves and try to take some actions, and probably some support that they need to help them address these actions or these challenges that they are facing in communities when it comes to climate change and adaptation measures. Next, please. Two major challenges that come out strongly across the various countries: the lack of knowledge and awareness of the issues, lack of technical and financial support. These were two major areas: knowledge and financial support, that most countries feel these are major challenges to their initiatives to address issues related to climate change challenges. The next, please. So technical support is mentioned by many participants as the most important support needed, and I think that follows logically, because as we saw in the previous slide, it comes out strongly as a challenge. So that is where they will need some support to help them address issues related to climate change. Next, please. In terms of looking at various countries, various ecological zones, in sub-Equatoria, for example, in Cote d'Ivoire, about 57% need support with community mobilization. But in Savannah Center, we have 56% who actually need better enforcement of the laws. In Ethiopia, we have 56% who need technical support and advice, and about 40% who also need the same thing. So when you even go to the countries and look at the various ecological zones, you see the differences in terms of major support that people need in various communities. And this is why this tool, for me, is quite important in getting to the bottom, getting to the communities to know their needs. Next, please. About 70% of the participants strongly expect the government. I mean, in terms of if you need support, where do you need that support from? They expect the government to support communities in climate change adaptation and biodiversity conservation. Ethiopia seems to be an exception to this. Many more participants from Ethiopia than any other country said the government has been a key initiator of our community actions in the areas, as we saw in the earlier slide. Next, please. Again, with the exception of Ethiopia, most of the participants in all countries strongly expect traditional or community leaders to support them in their fight against challenges from climate change and adaptation. Next, please. Yeah, another quotation from the participants. In my opinion, climate change, local authorities should organize meetings so that we can get together and discuss issues. And this goes back to what we saw earlier, that they need the local authority to support them in fighting those. Next, please. NGOs, especially international ones, are strongly expected to also support, but in Ethiopia, that is not the case generally. The next one, please. Uganda and Ethiopia do not seem to have strong expectations from women and from youth to in terms of support, but other countries think that yes, women and youth can have very important or strong say in terms of supporting them to fight climate change and adaptation issues. Next one, please. Great. Thank you very much. So these are some few results, interesting results coming from our engagement with the community people, right from the community. Obviously, these are important, but there are also some few challenges with this approach, and this is what we want to talk about in the next few slides. Thank you. One is using the OAD approach is a little bit limited in terms of representativeness of the information or the data. This is because this approach do not possess, or some people in the community do not possess or have access to a phone. Some lack the technical literacy to answer the poll. Others do not feel confident to express their views in such poll. And we still have some others who do not speak the language used in the poll. So all this will come as a sources of a kind of a limited representation. Geographical, gender, and age biases could also come in, especially if the radio station is only concentrated in a small area. The information may come from only that community. And as we saw in the presentation area, gender and age biases also come in because of unequal access or ability to manipulate phones when it comes to interacting with laser platform. So that is one challenge with this approach. I think the next one is the fact that we have a small number of choices because you are only using phone to answer questions. We try to limit the questions to not that many, and also options are quite small. We have some, at least some ability to gather some qualitative information, but that is also quite limited. And because of this, information generated may sometimes be relatively simple, and capture may not be able to capture more complex dimensions of the issues that are affecting the community members. Nevertheless, I think this is quite a massive tool that can gather a lot of information from a lot of people in the communities, and that can help us to gather information for some policy, what do you call it, initiatives and analysis. And I think my next colleague, my colleagues in the next speakers are going to talk a little bit more about that. So stay tuned. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Samuel, for those very comprehensive results. Again, a reminder, these results really are used to inform the broader project, but on their own, I think they have some interesting insights for many different organizations across the board, whether you're a civil society organization, a potential for-profit business, or even governments. And to speak to a little bit of that experience of how governments might interact with, might engage with, might find some value in these results, I'd like to invite up Ms. Ange Patricia Adiko, the Deputy Director of Studies and Projects from the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Cote d'Ivoire, to share a few remarks about her experience in participating and engaging with and thoughts on the relevance of both the on-air dialogues results and the project overall. So Ms. Ange, over to yourself.
Merci beaucoup à la modératrice.
Thanks a lot to the facilitator and for the translation. Thanks for inviting me to participate in this key important event. As you know, my name is Ange Patricia Adiko. I am working at the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development of Cote d'Ivoire. I am the focal point for action and climate empowerment. So I'm here to say that the government, regarding what you are doing, is really complying to what we have been doing. The opinion of the population is very important, since climate change is affecting everyone. No one is spared from it. This is why in Cote d'Ivoire, we had the opportunity with the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. Even yesterday, the ministry has changed because we have a new government. And right now, we are having the Ministry of Environment, Sustainable Development and Ecological Transition. This is the new name. To go further, I would say that the Ministry of Environment is working in compliance with the action we are mentioning here. As for the support we are providing, as a focal point for climate change support, at the level of the international actions, what we are doing is to make sure people are receiving information through awareness raising, through trainings and information sharing. And this means that the perspective of people is very important. And in Cote d'Ivoire, we have been able to review the legislation. And in this regard, actions will be planned to be implemented with population. And this means that we will be doing great things. But for these actions to be successful, we need the opinion, the comments of the population to make sure we are taking into account their needs. So at the international level, we also make sure that we choose some action and to make sure that we are taking into account these action at the international level. In this regard, we have developed 5 pillars. And for the third one, this pillar is focused on communication for action. In this regard, for this pillar, we are making sure that gender is taken into account. This communication, if we are really to improve them, we will be able to change the communication strategy to make sure we are able to face climate change. And in this way, we will be able to integrate new action to be able to work in synergy with NGOs who are closer to the communities. We may be close to the communities, but even when we know that everyone is affected by the climate change, every stakeholder should find an agreement regarding the action to be implemented so that we are able to tackle climate change. In this regard, it is important for us, all of us, to have a good strategy and for communication. And in this regard, it will be good for all of us to work together to make sure that we have a sustainable solution response and to make sure that the population, the communities are resilient in a sustainable way. For the Department of Climate Change Control and the protection of environment, we are working more on the protection of ecological zones. We also have a committee with a focal point who is focusing on biodiversity issues. So I will say that in this regard, for what you have shared today, I can see we are working in the same vision and on the same focus. We need first, as you mentioned in your presentation, to know the reasons, the need of the communities and the reason for this climate change and why the solutions are not going further efficiently. Thank you for your attention.
Vous m'avez entendu? Allô?
Yes, thank you, Miss Ange Patricia Adiko, for those great comments and for also highlighting the importance of using data and listening to communities, particularly from the government lens, and wonderful to see that Cote d'Ivoire is doing exactly that. To end our presentation, I'd like to pass it off to our colleague Sarem to talk about what are some of the policy implications, what are some of the policy outcomes, and what are some of the outcomes we hope for by using these on-air dialogues and the processes that come with them. So Sarem, I pass it over to you.
Thanks, Christian. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. So now that you have an understanding of on-air dialogues and the types of results that we can extract from, we're now going to talk about the why. So why do these OAD results matter? And again, it comes down to the relevance of OADs that Charles was talking about earlier. So I want to raise four main reasons why the OAD results are significant. So the first reason is related to policy and decision-making process. I think you heard from Ms. Adiko, and it's pretty clear how, policy can be influenced by these consultations with rural communities. And as part of our stakeholder events, like dialogue events, we will try to discuss and share these results with relevant stakeholders such as government, CSOs, and women groups, in the aim of influencing policies, plans, and investments, so that we can have well-crafted policies that can be a response to rural communities' aspirations, experience, and challenges. So I'm going to share some of the key policy outcomes at the end of my presentation as part of our NBS project. So the second reason is related to programming and program development. So for example, in the NBS project, OADs helped us identify topics for further research. So issues that we want to focus on in our radio programs, such as documentaries and participatory radio campaigns. So these documentaries and campaigns are aimed to encourage rural communities to take action against climate change and to take nature-based solutions actions so that they can be resilient to the effects of climate change. Next slide, please. So the third reason is about service delivery, because OADs can be served as a tool for market surveys or market analysis, so that we can generate data on needs and demand for services. And as part of our partnership with the campaign, with the company, we actually conducted consultation with rural communities to determine access to inputs such as seeds, equipment, and loans by communities they intended to support. Next slide, please. So finally, the last reason, but not the least, is about empowering marginalized groups. So amplifying the voices of marginalized groups and accountability by decision makers and leaders on climate change issues. Next slide, please. So as part of our NBS project, we are intended to broadcast these OAD results with communities during our radio shows so that communities can really understand the implication of their interventions and be encouraged to participate in our next cycle of consultation. And also we are planning to invite government staff as guests to discuss policy issues and actions, the type of actions the government is taking to address those issues. Next slide, please. The OADs are also an opportunity for a face-to-face dialogue that will connect rural communities to policymakers, and hence, developing meaningful public engagements. Because several studies have shown that the traditional form of top-down communication doesn't work in terms of climate change adaptation issues and natural resource governance. So it's a two-way process. The ODs are a two-way process where policymakers and rural communities in exchange can learn from each other. And this OAD approach and the dialogue events are just doing that. Next slide, please. And it's also a tool which is very innovative because it helps us include the voice of marginalized groups, such as women, minority groups, and youth, because adaptation efforts will not be effective unless we integrate gender and social inclusion aspects. And with this approach, we're not leaving no one behind. So moving on to some key policy outcomes that came up with the OEDs and these dialogue processes that we have had so far. So the first key policy outcome is about invasive species and diseases as a result of climate change. And of course, adaptation policy at national or local level should focus on addressing these kind of issues that communities are facing. The second policy outcome is about mainstreaming nature-based solution in agricultural extension and environmental strategies, which is also very, very fundamental. Next slide, please. There's also some key policy outcomes in terms of bottom-up planning needs to be ensured in the national adaptation process, because this approach of bottom-up will definitely take into account local knowledge, traditions developed by rural communities. And in terms of gender, I mean, it's important as well to integrate the gender responsive approaches in those national adaptation processes and other planning frameworks when we are dealing with climate change adaptation. Next slide, please. And of course, it's important to support, the empowerment of marginalized groups, and very important to have a specific response to their needs and to their needs of resilience. And finally, it's also important to have customized solution to meet their needs, because as you know, rural communities in sub-Saharan Africa are very much linked to natural resources, and their livelihoods depend on natural resources. So that's it for me. Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarem, for that great overview and some specific policy, some specific kind of policy areas of action, and how we're ultimately using these results to advance certain priorities. And I think your focus on specific and contextual changes is so important for us to remember, and great to hear too that it's not just something in terms of an on-air dialogue that governments can do, but also private business or NGOs. We have some time for some questions, so I'm going to put some questions to each of you, our panelists. And Samuel, I'm going to start with you. And this question comes from Evelyn Morin. What could explain the fact that for the same ecosystem, some respondents report no change, while others report major changes? Is it because respondents come from different parts of the country and report changes or no change in different parts of the ecosystem? And they're talking in particular to some of the first slides that you had put up. So Samuel, over to you. And if others also have some thoughts, then I will allow them to go. But Samuel, over to you first.
Thank you. That's a great question. Basically, this is aggregated information, and it's questions like this that we need, or this tool will help us to actually dig deeper. So if we have the same community, we have, say, young people or the women disagreeing, or the same ecosystem, the same ecological zone, when women are disagreeing with men, and young people disagreeing with the older people, then it calls for deeper, maybe research, further investigation as to why this is the case. But basically, because this is aggregated information, some of these are coming from different villages, communities, which some may be maybe few kilometers apart. So that could also be part of the reason, as the person who asked the question pointed out. But the most important thing for this is it helps us to dig more, to gather more information, and to know what's going on. I don't know if that answers the question. I've seen Charles' hands also up.
Yes, thank you, Samuel. I think you said it. And in addition to what you say, it could also be in terms of the way different people perceive the impact. Women are faced with certain realities that men are not faced with in terms of their activities and things like that. So they could perceive it differently, and it may impact them in that sense differently. Also, in terms of activities, I think that farming communities, people who are involved in crop production, may also perceive it different from those who are occupationally related to maybe teaching jobs and things like that. So there could be those kind of differences. But yes, I do agree with Samuel that these are things that we could further, dig into in terms of our work closely with the communities. Thank you.
Great. And I think that brings up a good point too, that the honor dialogues are a great way to gather a mass amount of information, but also present you with opportunities to dive deeper into certain phenomena or certain pieces of evidence that start to emerge. Thank you, Samuel and Charles, for those responses. Charles, the next question is for you, and it comes from Diego. How involved are communities in formulating the questions that you ask? Do you have a participatory process for formulating or revising these questions?
That's an excellent question. And to be honest, for this first round of honor dialogues, we didn't have the process that we have now. And how we came about these questions, we were supported by what we call the National Advisory Panel. It is a group of experts at country level, including the ministries, institutions, the research, gender organizations, NGOs working in the sector, that we have put in place, to advise the project at country level. And they support us to come out with some of these questions. And every year they will be doing that. But in the next round of on-air dialogues that we'll do, we have decided to have what we call stakeholder roundtable meetings, where we'll be inviting representatives from communities to join these other groups, to really think about what are the issues in their different communities that we should be considering consulting broadly on, and that will constitute the basis for the elaboration of questions. Thank you.
Great, and Samuel, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, if I can just add to what Charles said briefly. Yeah, I think basically part of this was also exploratory, but to add to what Charles said, before this, we had also done what we call a national state of play and community state of play kind of formative assessment. That we did to gather some general issues surrounding climate change and adaptation problems being faced by the community and also the country at large. So from this, that we gather these questions and go to the community to explore. And as Charles said, the next stage will be when we just go into the specific issues and deal with the community specific problems. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Samuel. We have one other question from Ata Kwasi Bamba, and this one might be for Charles, but might also be for you, Sarem. So I'll let you two decide who might be the best position. But the question is, what is being done on the ground to tackle climate change, especially given that people are aware of the changes, but often don't know what to do or even where and to whom to turn? So either Charles or maybe Sarem, I'll turn it over to one or the both of you to start.
Sarah, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. So thank you for your question. Well, actually, the nature-based solution project is about development for communication. So it's more about encouraging and raising awareness about climate change adaptation and biodiversity loss, and what action rural communities are implementing. But we can highlight what other organizations are doing in the ground, and trying to encourage behavioral change and implementing those actions by rural communities. So over to you, Charles.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarem. Yeah, that's it. We are, as I mentioned earlier, we identifying those best solutions or nature-based solutions and try to scale that across a wide range of communities in a way that is it doesn't have to be exactly what they are doing, but they have to adapt those in their particular context. And you would find these are not, what we are learning is that there are no really extraordinary new solutions that are out there, but you would hear things like mangrove restoration, farmer managed regenerative agriculture, you will hear about agroforestry practices, composting and all of that. You know, this is important because what has been promoted by most policies, agricultural policies, is really this intensive use of chemicals and intensification, monoculture, and things like that. So I think these emerging or these existing practices are valuable, and we are identifying some of these and we are scaling them out in different communities. What we're doing is we're running documentaries on some of these communities that are practicing this, and using these documentaries to motivate other communities and accompanying them using the participatory radio campaigns to be able to implement some of these interesting nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sarem and Charles. And I think that also reminds us that these results on their own are great, and OEDs being on-air dialogues on their own are great, but they're even better when they're paired with a certain program that you're looking to run and to promote and things of that nature, so that you can inform how best to get that information to people and what interventions might be best. This next one is for yourself, Sarem and Charles, and this person's self-labeled it as a provocative question. So their question is, the results showed that in all the countries that respondents strongly agreed that women were adequately included into decision-making processes, they wonder if communities see no challenges regarding gender inclusion, and why should we still focus on gender-sensitive climate change adaptation? So Sarem or Charles, I'll pass that over to you first. And that question is from Kristen Haida Greenbank.
Quite a question. Thank you so much. Actually, yeah, it is a preliminary outcome, and we are very much interested to dig more into this to really understand this inclusion that the results claim here. But one thing that we are hoping to do is we know that we cannot achieve resilience by not addressing the question of inclusion and gender, you know, because the kind of solutions that are identified determines whether certain groups are excluded. For example, if we want to promote more of tree crops and things like that, that may be dominated by men, and it could be more of men interests. But we need to think about what are the kind of solutions that we are promoting. Are those solutions having potential to exclude certain genders, or are those solutions inclusive of all genders? So we recognize that there is more to be known about the realities about gender equality in the communities and how this project can better respond to that. So it's a very fundamental question and something that we want to learn more, but as of now, we are very keen about the criteria of inclusion and gender equality as part of everything that we do in this project. Thank you.
And if I may add, Christian.
Sure.
Yeah, so just to add to what Charles said, and thanks for that great question again. This is why, in addition to OAD result, we are also going to the communities to gather some kind of a focus group discussion information, gather some kind of really dig a little bit deeper, and asking questions like, okay, when you say people are included in all decision processes, women, youth, marginalized, what do you really mean? So that is where I think we can also get to the bottom of some of these interesting results we are seeing. Thank you.
Great. Sarem, did you have anything you wanted to add to that question?
Yeah, just to add, I recently read a recent report that came out, and it states that, you know, gender inclusion is very much fundamental for the effectiveness of nature-based solutions. So if we don't integrate this this gender inclusion aspect, we won't have the benefits that we are expecting from these actions that we're trying to implement, so that rural communities can, you know, be resilient to the effects of climate change. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sarem. There's another comment on this question. I'm not sure if folks would like to respond to it, but a comment was about, isn't part of the answer that men and women are embedded in societies with social norms around gender roles, so they aren't always consciously perceived or recognized? So any commentary or response or thoughts on that comment?
Yes, yeah, that's a good question. I think we already provided part of that response to say that we have done in this project what we call the gender-based analysis to really see how gender equality and inclusion is playing out in the context of nature-based solution and climate change. And we're using all of that feedback to inform our programming. So, for example, we have the IUCN Global Standards on Nature-Based Solution, which is kind of the framework that is guiding our work. And what we are doing is we are trying to adapt the standards a little bit to the project. One important thing is we have kind of isolated a criteria on gender equality and inclusion that normally is part of the governance criteria, so that we can be able to address GI, gender equality and inclusion, as a specific issues rather than dilute it within the governance criteria. So there are different processes that we're doing in terms of engaging with women rights and youth organizations in country, because they understand the country context, the social roles, the underlying gender issues within the context of the communities where we work. So we cannot claim that we know that we have engaged all of those organizations that can provide really good insights and analysis on how we can work through some of these issues in the project. They are all part of our national advisory panel, you know, to advise us on the project. Thank you.
Great. So Sarem or Samuel, want to give you each time, and if you'd like to add anything. Otherwise, I think we have time for one more question.
Nothing to add from me.
Yeah, nothing from you, so you can go ahead with the question, please.
Great, and I'd like to pass this next question over to our head of specialty services, Adiyinka. The question being, to what extent is Farm Radio International able to expand this use of on-air dialogues as an approach to new countries or regions, or with new partners? So
Yeah.
Adiyinka, I'll pass the question to you.
Yeah, thank you for that interesting question. On-air dialogues are a very flexible radio type and adaptable to different topics and different geographies. Farm Radio has the ability to mobilize the implementation of on-air dialogues across different regions, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and even beyond. So we've actually implemented on-air dialogues across a number of countries, and where other factors that determine our ability to deploy would include the duration and the onset of such an initiative. But generally speaking, Farm Radio has the capacity to deploy on-air dialogues across different regions and also across different teams, and working with different kinds of partners. We've worked with in the private sector, we've worked with governments, we've worked with civil society and international development funders. So it's quite a flexible radio approach. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Adiyinka. I think we have time to squeeze in one last question, and I'll put it to the whole of our panel. And the question is about what has Farm Radio International done to extrapolate this data and information to the global stage, so that global decisions, things like topics around climate financing, also consider locally generated statistics and perspective, rather than sort of the conventional big data from reports generated far from the ground without those local contexts. So I'm not sure who might like to take that one first, but I'll put that to our broader panel, and maybe Samuel, we can start with you if you have some thoughts on this.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if I understand the question very well, but if we have to extrapolate the data that we have, basically we can kind of triangulate this information with the various national data, and with that scale it up to other countries. And we can use techniques in statistics called small area estimation. I don't want to go into details on that, but you can use that kind of technique to do kind of extrapolation to various countries, various regions, and the whole world at large. But I don't know if that is what the person who asked the question, but in technical sense, this is the one way we can approach it. Probably my colleague can also add something to it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know too, we're also trying to put some answers to that in the Q&A too. But Charles or Surem, did you have any thoughts on this question?
Well, I'm also struggling with comprehending the question, but if I do understand, I think like what we're doing now is part of how we are sharing this information, not only with the governments in country and stakeholders for policy and other purposes, but also for the international community to, as part of our contribution in terms of what the community's experiences are. So doing this webinar is part of achieving that. We have recently also presented this on-air dialogue results and other work that we are doing at the AGRF that took place recently in Africa, and all the climate summits that are always annual events. We will be identifying which ones will be sharing relevant results with. So we are not only looking at the country level, but actually at the international level as well. Thank you.
Great. Sarem, was there anything you wanted to add to that? Otherwise, I'll add one final thing.
Yeah, I think I have the same understanding as Charles. As Charles mentioned, we are trying to share the results globally and trying to see what are the implications of these results in terms of the global, frameworks around, biodiversity, around climate change, things like that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Sarem. And the last piece I'll add is we would put this to this group as well, as if you have a convening or an event or a group that would find value in hearing more about these types of results, then do get in touch so that we can help to share them to those different tables and in those rooms where some of those decisions are made, but also we'll ensure as best we can that these results are available as publicly as possible to hopefully incorporate into those data sets. I'd like to end things just with a thank you, or a few thank yous. The first is to all of our wonderful speakers, of course. You all did a fantastic job, and I hope that everyone here took as much value as possible from them. And I think that there's a lot of great things shared today. A special thank you as well to our translator, Sarah, for not just doing the live interpretation today, but also translating all of the slides in preparation for today. A special thank you to our tech team in the background for helping with recording, as well as advancing the slides and answering in the Q&A. It can be a tedious job, so we very much appreciate all of you in filling that role. A thank you to Yankasa for partnering with us on this event to help promote and to make sure others could attend and working with us, as well as to Global Affairs for the funding of the Nature-Based Solutions Project. A number of people have brought up today, how could we use these results, or how could we do potentially our own on-air dialogues or participate in some way? And to that, I'd say we'd love to get in touch with you to talk about exactly that, even if it's the forming of a question. So if you want to get in touch with us, our information is there on the screen, the info@farmradio.org. We'll also send out a follow-up email in the coming days in case you are interested in talking with us more, as well as with the slides, as well as the recording for this event. And we'll also have a short follow-up survey if you could answer that, so we can make these events that much better and also influence and inform what other types of information you might be interested in hearing from. And a final thank you to all of you for taking time out of your day, wherever it is that you're joining us from, to make this webinar such a success. And we hope that in the spirit of that last question, that you'll use this information to add to the data sets and the evidence that you're currently using in your lines of work, and bring those local perspectives. We've heard it from all of our speakers how key those local perspectives are, and also at scale, but the individual comments and feedback from communities that we don't always hear from is so key. And we hope that you'll be advocates alongside us in advancing that as an important part of our international work. So thank you everyone so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care.